It seemed at the time impossible.
Has the most famous ship in the history of the world been discovered at last?
The Gilgamesh epic paralleled exactly the story of Noah in the Bible.
There is plenty of ancient historical evidence spanning nearly 2,000 years that the Ark is on Mount Ararat.
The location of the mystical Mount Sinai itself is the subject of relentless argument.
The biblical story of the burning bush is completely true and totally provable.
It must have seemed to Moses that God was asking him to do the impossible.
In the book of Matthew, we're told that the graves were opened and the bodies of many dead saints were raised to life.
During the night, all of Sennacherib's army had been struck down by some kind of plague.
Mary Magdalene was a woman of independent means and spirit.
For nearly 2,000 years, she's inspired millions of people, especially women.
The Grail is believed by many to be the cup containing the wine that Christ associated with his blood at the Last Supper. According to the legend, only Sir Galahad was able to reach it, dying in a moment of transcendental glory. The sound of pottery shattering caught his attention. The curiosity of the world was ignited.
The Dead Sea Scrolls date back almost 2,000 years.
Along with the many papyrus and leather scrolls was a scroll made of copper. As Herod's men attempted to open the tomb, a blast of flame filled the chamber and drove them back.
God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place.
And the stars of heaven fell unto earth.
Fires are burning all over the city. Several plane crashes with countless calls to lives lost. Complete chaos is the only way I can describe the situation.
For the great day of his wrath is come.
It turns out that Bible prophecy has an unparalleled record of accuracy.
The focus of the conflict lies in the destiny of Jerusalem.
This will be the last great battle, and one in which God himself will eventually take part. You'll be amazed at what has been discovered. For nearly 2 millennia, the Christian world has been stymied by a mystery not even the Knights of the Round Table were able to solve: the whereabouts of the Holy Grail. The experts are far from being in agreement. 3 churches in both France and Italy claim they have it. Others claim it can be found in Glastonbury, the ancient Avalon, or buried with the great treasures of the Knights Templar. Is it possible that there may be even more than one Holy Grail? Let's see if we can find it. The legend of the Holy Grail is one of the most enduring in Western art and literature. The Grail is believed by many to be the cup containing the wine that Christ associated with his blood at the Last Supper. And it is also believed by some church historians that after the crucifixion, it actually contained the literal blood of Christ. Besides its obvious value as a religious artifact, the Holy Grail, according to legend, will bestow wisdom, great treasures of knowledge, unbelievable power, and perhaps even eternal life upon the bearer.
After the crucifixion, Pilate agreed to allow Joseph of Arimathea to take the body of Christ. Tradition tells us that Joseph and Nicodemus took the body down from the cross, blood still flowing from the wounds. The apocryphal literature, that is, the books that were not included in the Bible because they were not considered to be inspired, tell us that Mary Magdalene gathered the blood in a cup or bowl from the ground at the foot of the cross. This is in accordance with ancient Hebrew burial tradition that the blood was sacred and was to be collected and buried with the body.
Knowing what the traditions were, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Mary would have brought a cup with her for that very purpose. nor is it unthinkable that she would bring a cup that was special to her and to Jesus' friends. But of course, it's not as simple as that.
Legends and traditions abound regarding the blood of Jesus. One such tradition remains unsupported by medical science, the shroud, and Jewish custom. It has been suggested that when the body was laid in the tomb, blood could still flow from the wounds. That blood could have been collected in yet another cup, possibly even a cup owned by Joseph himself. That would be blood uncontaminated with dirt. So now we have the possibility of 2 grails. But there's more. On the 3rd day, when Mary and Peter returned to the tomb, all they found inside was the burial cloth and the 2 cups that had been used to collect the blood. Tradition has it that Peter gathered up the grave clothes and Joseph's cup containing the blood. About 300 years later, Emperor Constantine sent his mother, Helena, to Jerusalem to find relics of the crucifixion. She came across a wooden cup alleged to contain the blood of Jesus. She took this cup to Rome and presented it to her son, where it became known as the Marian chalice. Meanwhile, according to tradition, Peter poured the blood from Joseph's cup into 5 vials that had contained anointing oil. Mary had brought these vials to the tomb earlier. Joseph and Nicodemus were each given 2 vials, and Mary kept one of them.
So now we have the possibility of 2 Holy Grails, or a total of 7 artifacts worthy of consideration as holy relics. And all of them are going off in different directions. But is this all just exotic myth-making, or is there some genuine historic validity to the story?
Peter, it should be remembered, is regarded by the Catholic Church as the first pope. Some traditions hold that he took the cup of Joseph back to Rome, where it was used for centuries to perform the Eucharist.
So there is some historic tradition, at least, connecting an actual cup to the events surrounding the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ. But what of the other receptacles or grails? What could have happened to them?
The Church takes no position on any of these Grail stories. But according to one tradition, Nicodemus made a carving of Christ called Volto Santo, in which he supposedly hid his 2 vials. We do know he remained in Jerusalem till his death. But the 2 vials of Christ's blood are pure speculation. Another tradition that has gained widespread acceptance in Britain has Joseph of Arimathea bringing the cup of the Last Supper to Glastonbury, England, and is said to have buried it in the ground of Chalice Hill, next to an ancient well that runs as a spring and is known as Chalice Well. An earlier part of the tradition has that shortly after the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, Joseph was expelled from Jerusalem, and with Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and other disciples fled to France, where they established ministries up the Rhone Valley. Later, Joseph with Mary and 12 other disciples left France and sailed to Britain, where they founded the first Christian community in Glastonbury, England. A Glastonbury legend tells of a community building with a table around which 12 persons could sit, with a 13th seat left empty to remind everyone of the place where Jesus sat. This table came to be called the First Grail Table.
The Grail romance, as it is sometimes called, now begins to take on worldwide implications. Did Joseph have the cup with him that Peter rescued from the grave, or just his 2 vials? If he had the cup, how did it get to Rome? Some church historians believe it can be found at Glastonbury today, but if that's true, how did it get back?
The Marian chalice, the wooden cup found by Helena and presented to Constantine, was moved to Britain in 410 AD to keep it safe from the attacks on Rome.
It is significant that the Episcopalian Church of England officially declared the traditions of Joseph of Arimathea bringing Christianity to Britain is no longer a tradition, but a fact. This being true would account for the sacred relics being connected with the great Glastonbury Abbey. It is believed the chalice was hidden there until the abbey was destroyed by the disastrous fire of 1184, at which time the monks saved the cup and later hid it in the walls of the rebuilt abbey by King Henry II. Later, when the abbey was destroyed by Henry VIII, the cup was discovered in the walls by the monks, who fled to Wales, where it once again disappeared. The legend of Joseph's 2 vials which had become the root of the Christian faith at Glastonbury, were ultimately either lost or again hidden.
It is here that the legend of King Arthur and the story of the Holy Grail cross paths. And whether by accident or design, the tale of the quest for the Holy Grail altered English history forever. Could it be that the famous Knights of the Round Table founded by King Arthur actually existed? Is it possible that the fabled Round Table was in fact the Grail Table, built by Joseph and his little band of refugees? And which grail or cup or chalice would the knights have been seeking anyway?
St. Augustine, who arrived in Avalon in 597 AD, mentioned the past presence of Jesus in a letter to Pope Gregory. He also recognized that part of Avalon was already Christian, and that a church was erected there even before Joseph of Arimathea supposedly returned after the death of Christ.
But if a church was there before Joseph of Arimathea returned, who built it? Could it be that Jesus really did come to Glastonbury? There are two very strong traditions that give this place special significance. The first has to do with thorn trees. Upon his arrival, Joseph is said to have thrust his staff into the ground on this hill. It sprouted and brought to England the sturdy, blooming thorn trees now found in this area. The second tradition, of course, is that of the Holy Grail. This olive wood cup can in fact be traced to the destruction of the Glastonbury Abbey. But can it be traced to Jerusalem, indeed to the crucifixion? Legend and tradition, of course, are scorned by theologians and scholars alike. But if it can be demonstrated that Joseph of Arimathea actually did return to Glastonbury or Avalon following the crucifixion, doesn't that lend some credence to the Grail legend?
The great body of Grail romances came into existence only between the years 1180 and 1240. In fact, nothing new has been added since the 13th century. The oldest known Grail romance is by the French poet Chrétien. It tells of Percival's visit to the Grail castle, where he supposedly sees the Grail borne in by a beautiful damsel. But those who maintain a purely Christian origin for the Grail find its real beginnings in the apocryphal literature of Nicodemus. The King Arthur legend was brought into the literature of Nicodemus with the evangelization of Great Britain. This legend was then developed almost exclusively on British soil. Since Glastonbury is intimately associated with both legends, scholars erroneously connect this British sanctuary to the origins of the Grail romance.
Not everything about the Holy Grail is legend. There are some verifiable historical facts. From 1118 to 1314 AD, the Knights Templar did keep and protect the most important relics of Christendom in Jerusalem. It is assumed the Holy Grail was among them.
Around 1090 AD, an order of knights was formed to travel to Jerusalem to locate a treasure that dated back 2,000 years. They were called the Order of the Poor Knights of the Temple of Solomon. They would later become known as the Rich and Powerful Knights Templar. The Knights Templar spent the first few years of their existence in the stables of the Temple of Solomon. From there, they excavated underneath the temple and obtained religious artifacts, including the Holy Grail. By the 1300s, the Knights Templar had amassed great wealth and power.
But King Philip of France, fearful of their power, declared them all heretics and had them all arrested. A few of the knights escaped and survived in Spain, England, Scotland, and Germany. Interestingly enough, with the demise of the Knights Templar, the Grail legend also disappeared. From 1400 to 1900, a period of 500 years, there are no novels, no books, no historical interest, until the outbreak of World War II. Suddenly, the Nazis expressed a keen interest in its whereabouts. Otto Rahn, a high-ranking SS official, began a search for the Holy Grail in Montségur. He did, in fact, write a book about it, but then he mysteriously disappeared.
The reason why Hitler was so interested in finding the Holy Grail is because he was interested in all things holy that were thought to have mystical power.
From this point on, the travels of the Holy Grail returned to the mists of legend. Apparently, when the Marian chalice, that's the one found by Constantine's mother, came to Britain from Rome, it became confused with the two blood vials of Joseph, and they became one object in the classic Grail legend. But where did it, or they, go?
Ultimately, the two vials were either lost or hidden. It is possible that they made their way to a sacred grotto in Shropshire. There is even a hint that they could have passed through Roslin Chapel in Scotland and ended up in Rome with a group of Knights Templar. Only the carving of Nicodemus with its precious vials remained in place. It remained in Palestine for hundreds of years. But even this icon became endangered and had to be removed to Lucca, Italy, where it can be seen today.
That still leaves one vial, the one that would have been given to Mary Magdalene, still unaccounted for. All of these vessels have been mentioned specifically or associated in some way with the Grail legend. And in spite of their vastly different legends, all of them seem to have melted into one single relic called the Holy Grail. Both the legend and the traditions make it clear that each object played a different role in the crucifixion, but all, if the legend is to be believed, contained the blood of Christ. And the legends place each one in the possession of someone who could have, at one time, actually have held the one true Grail. But there is little agreement as to which, if any of them, can claim that title today. Could it be that none of them are the real Holy Grail? That, in fact, this supposed artifact was found accidentally in an old trunk in an English attic. Just a few years ago, Britons were startled one evening by a strange news story. At first, many of them thought it was a joke, but it soon became evident that the announcer and the person he was talking about were, in fact, very serious. According to the story released in London, Dr. Phillips, an amateur historian, found a green onyx relic in an English attic. Just like the knights of old, Dr. Phillips's discovery was the result of 7 years of scouring the land.
In the Middle Ages, the biggest business going was relics, and so I decided to go in search of the holiest relic of them all, that which was associated with Jesus Christ, the Holy Grail. I am convinced that this cup is the same one found by the Roman Empress Helena in Christ's sepulchre and used by Mary Magdalene to collect drops of Christ's blood.
Not everyone agrees, of course. The 24-year-old owner of the cup thought the chalice was just a Victorian novelty she inherited from her grandparents before Dr. Phillips started rummaging through her attic. And the British Museum believes the relic may be nothing more than a Roman scent jar. But Dr. Phillips didn't just proclaim his find, the Holy Grail, out of thin air. He used geography, poetic descriptions, and the Grail legends themselves as the basis for his claim of authenticity.
The cup doesn't match the mythical description of a magnificent chalice, but it does match the description given by a German poet in 1200 AD, the oldest known description of the Holy Grail. A Walter Langham found it in 1920. I then traced it to his great-granddaughter, who had it in a crate up in her attic. She thought it was just a piece of nothing. I admit it looks like an old egg cup, but I am convinced that this is the object that inspired the Grail legends and stories.
In the latter part of the 20th century, a new theory has emerged.
Stories dating from 200 to 700 AD from the Byzantine or Greek East came to Europe mainly with returning crusaders between 1100 and 1250. That was the very time when the Grail accounts appeared in the West. This much is a certainty. When we focus not on any real cup, but on the interpretation of these Greek stories by 13th century Grail writers, we discover that there was never a Grail until it was called a Grail. Although every mythology in the ancient world told of magical cups, horns, and cauldrons, not one of them was ever called a Grail. The word and the thing were created around 1200 by French poets, and from the beginning it was they who made it the cup or dish used by Jesus at the Last Supper.
Since the morning of the resurrection, the very idea of this holy of holiest relics has held the promise of great wisdom, understanding, even life itself. At the moment, it doesn't seem possible to single out just one of the artifacts mentioned in the legends as the real Holy Grail and trace it to one of the dozen or so locations scholars, investigators, and devotees have identified in France or Glastonbury, England, Roslin Chapel in Scotland, in Wales, Italy, and Russia, or even the fortress of Suleiman the Magnificent in Iran. The legend is fantastic to say the least, and evidence to substantiate it is difficult to come by. Still, there are those who claim the Holy Grail is very real and as easy to see as any relic or artifact in the church today, if you're just willing to go far enough and dig deep enough to find it. Another key to our past was uncovered when the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in a cave in 1947. Along with the many papyrus and leather scrolls was a scroll made of copper. Since its discovery, there's been nothing but controversy over the copper scroll. But does what it contains amount to fact or fiction? Does it tell us where Jerusalem's temple treasures are hidden away in the desert for safekeeping? Let's explore the glittering mysteries of the lost Bible treasures. In 1947, a young shepherd tending his flock in the hills above the Dead Sea made what is perhaps the most significant archaeological discovery of all time, and it was purely by accident. He threw a rock into the mouth of one of the many caves that dot the rugged terrain. The sound of pottery shattering caught his attention, so he climbed inside the cave and discovered the first group of what would come to be known as the Dead Sea Scrolls.
The Dead Sea Scrolls date back almost 2,000 years, back to the time when the Jewish temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. The scrolls were written on either papyrus or leather and were stored in clay jars that were deposited into caves. They were found in the vicinity of the ancient settlement called Qumran near the Dead Sea. And they include both secular writings and religious texts, things like hymn books, biblical commentaries, two of the oldest known copies of the book of Isaiah, and fragments of almost every book in the Old Testament.
The curiosity of the world was ignited with the discovery of the first cache of scrolls. In the years to come, more and more of these ancient manuscripts, some 800 in all, would be discovered in and around the area of Qumran. Then, in 1952, the most unusual scroll of all was brought to light. Engraved on a 23-foot-long sheet of pure copper, its text contained a list of treasures that had been split up and hidden in 64 different locations. Archaeologists were astounded and curious. Was this the find of a lifetime or an ancient hoax?
The similarity in the writing and materials used for most of the Dead Sea Scrolls leads archaeologists to believe they came from the same sources. The most likely scenario is they were copied down by members of a Jewish sect called the Essenes, who once lived in the area of Qumran. But the copper scroll stands out from the others for two reasons. It's not written in narrative form like the other text. It's a list, pure and simple. A list of what many believe to be treasures from the Second Jewish Temple that were hidden in order to prevent them from falling into the hands of the Romans. The second thing that sets the copper scroll apart is it's the only one of the Dead Sea Scrolls that was not written on papyrus or leather. Instead, it was inscribed onto sheets of copper using a technique called bas relief. As we can see from this replica of the copper scroll, letters were hammered into the backside of the metal using a punch. This resulted in a raised letter text that showed through to the front side of the scroll. A tremendous amount of effort went into the making of this scroll, and I think that gives us a good indication that the copper scroll is a real treasure map. The Essenes knew that the list was of great importance, so they reasoned that by leaving this record on sheets of metal, it would have a greater chance of surviving the elements so that the treasure could one day be retrieved.
2,000 years have passed since the writing of the copper scroll. During that time, the Jews were scattered throughout the world, and the treasure was lost in the sands of time. Lost, but not forgotten. Modern-day treasure hunters and archaeologists would like nothing more than to rediscover these fabled riches. Has the time come for this lost Bible treasure to be revealed? Or are the hopeful looking for something that simply doesn't exist?
J.T. Millick was the first scholar to publish a translation of the text of the Copper Scroll. And in his opinion, the list contained in the scroll was nothing more than Jewish religious folklore. He based that belief on what he took to be parallel accounts of hidden treasure in the ancient Jewish literature. The best example of this parallel comes from a medieval Jewish midrash. These were commentaries on the Hebrew scriptures that were known to have been based on Jewish legend and parables. Millick believed this particular midrash provided an interpretive key to the Copper Scroll because it contains a story about the hiding of the temple treasures in secret underground compartments. The location of these places would not be known until the coming of the Messiah. The midrash also says that the inventory of the temple treasures was written on a copper tablet. Based on the obvious connection between the Copper Scroll and the midrash, which again Millick believed to be purely legend, he discounted the authenticity of the scroll.
When the Copper Scroll was discovered, the Qumran area was under the administration of the Kingdom of Jordan. The last things the Jordanians wanted was a group of amateur treasure hunters tearing through the countryside. But there was also the fear that if they found anything, that they might try to illegally export it from Jordan.
Jordan maintained a very tight control over the search for any of the Copper Scroll treasures because they wanted to avoid a conflict with the state of Israel, whose Jewish forefathers had hidden the treasure. At that time, Jordan did not recognize the existence of the Jewish state, and a claim by Israel over the treasure would force it to legally acknowledge Israel as plaintiff. This was something they desperately wanted to avoid. The Jordanians also feared an army of treasure hunters descending upon the desert to loot valuable artifacts.
The Jordanians' fear of treasure hunters was not unfounded. In the years that followed the publication of the Copper Scroll, a number of excavations took place. Both amateurs and professionals used the Copper Scroll as a guide.
The first and most notable search for the Copper Scroll treasure occurred in the early 1960s. It was undertaken by a man named John Allegro, a respected scholar who had come up with his own translation of the scroll and submitted it to the Jordanian government. With the official blessing of Jordan, Allegro searched for the buried treasure, but found nothing. At least that's what we have to assume, since no official report was published about the secret excavations.
Word gets around in the archaeological community, and so it was well known that John Allegro's search for the Copper Scroll treasure turned up nothing. But what's really interesting is the fact that the Jordanian government, which had been so adamant about the treasure being a fake, allowed someone to search for it at all. In the closing lines of the Copper Scroll, we find a notation about another secret scroll, which contains details that are crucial in the locating of the treasure. The text reads, "In the tunnel which is in Sakhab, to the north of Kaklit, a copy of this text and its explanation and its measurements and the inventory, item by item." J.T. Millick believed that the duplicate was in fact a longer, more detailed version of the list contained in the Copper Scroll, and that the Copper Scroll was meant only to contain the essential details, not enough to actually find the treasure unless you knew where it had been buried in the first place.
Is the long-lost sister to the Copper Scroll laying buried somewhere in the desert, just waiting to be discovered? Could this secret scroll be found based on the description of its location given in the Copper Scroll? And if it were found, would this key unlock the mystery of where the treasures are buried?
The Copper Scroll tells us that its companion is buried in the tunnel in Sakhab. But where's Sakhab? That's difficult to determine because the place names and markers have changed since ancient times. The most likely location is a place called Tel Shihab, to the far east of the Sea of Galilee and close to the remains of the old Roman road to Damascus. Most archaeologists believe that the Essenes had a settlement in Damascus that was significant enough to have its own kochlet or monastery. So it may well be that that second scroll is still hidden where it was buried 2,000 years ago. And as far as we know, no one's found it. And that means no one's found the treasure either.
But the Copper Scroll would take center stage once again when an amateur archaeologist and treasure hunter made an incredible discovery. In 1964, a man named Vendell Jones started looking for some of the items mentioned in the Copper Scroll. He spent more than 20 years searching for any sign of the treasure with no luck, until 1988, when his excavation team found a small earthen vessel in a cave near Qumran.
Numerous articles from the Second Temple are recorded on the copper scroll, including such specific items as the breastplate of the high priest, various treasures of both gold and silver, various plates that were used in the temple worship, and, most interesting of all, the oil of anointing, a flask made of clay that would hold the oil that was used to anoint the tabernacle, to anoint the Ark of the Covenant, and the high priest himself.
The juglet that Jones found was filled with a dark liquid substance. Analysis of the contents showed that it was a sweet-smelling oil. Jones immediately announced to the media that he'd found the sacred anointing oil of the copper scroll. If the anointing oil has indeed been found, the ramifications are enormous. A new temple can be built and anointed in Jerusalem, an event that, according to ancient prophecy, is a sign of the end of time. But has the composition of the oil been firmly established, or are there still some lingering doubts?
When Vendell Jones announced to the media that he'd discovered one of the treasures listed on the copper scroll, he made the front page of the New York Times. The discovery, in fact, is not what Mr. Jones claimed. Jones claimed that the oil was analyzed and had been proven to be the anointing oil as described in Exodus chapter 30. That's simply not the case. The oil was analyzed by the Casale Institute for Applied Chemistry at the Hebrew University, and those tests proved one thing conclusively. The contents of the juglet cannot be the holy anointing oil of the temple because it contains no olive oil. Anyone who's read the biblical text can see that olive oil is one of the main ingredients in the holy anointing oil. The analysis revealed that the oil is from the right time period, but it's not the anointing oil listed in the copper scroll, but a balsam oil that was used for perfume.
The controversy over the copper scroll will undoubtedly continue, as will the hunt for its treasure. But in a land so filled with history and intrigue, there's bound to be more than one lode of riches to pursue. According to tradition, this mosque is built over the tomb of the great Israelite leader, King David. However, most experts agree that the real tomb is not located here, but is hidden somewhere beneath the city of Jerusalem. Legend has it that when David was buried by his son, Solomon, an immense fortune in gold and silver was buried with him. Some say that as much as 375 tons of gold are buried with the king beneath the foundations of this ancient city. A fortune so vast that, if found, could change the course of history. Where did all these riches come from? And are they still there, just waiting to be discovered?
The treasure of the copper scroll is believed to have come from the Second Temple. But the wealth of King David came from the silver and gold that was gathered in order to build and furnish the First Temple. According to our best estimates, only a portion of those riches were actually necessary to complete the temple. The rest, it seems, was possibly stored away in David's tomb, according to burial instructions David gave to Solomon before he died.
The statement that Josephus made in regards to David, he claimed that David was the richest of all kings. And the fact that we know now historically and that Alexander the Great had seized around 7,000 tons of gold. Josephus certainly knew of Alexander. He certainly knew of David. Therefore, he was comparing David to Alexander. Nobody knows where King David's tomb is located today. And according to the Jewish historian Josephus, that's exactly the way David wanted it.
Could it be that the treasure of King David's tomb has been lost for thousands of years? If so, its discovery would be even more important than the unearthing of the magnificent burial place of King Tut. But ancient documents indicate that grave robbers may have looted David's burial site in the past. What happened to these treasure hunters? Did they obtain the riches they sought after?
According to Josephus, the tomb of David had been disturbed twice in its history, once for necessity and the last time for greed. The first occasion came around 150 years before the birth of Christ, and this was when Antiochus, the king of Syria, came down to Jerusalem and besieged the city. And in order to get rid of him, Hyrcanus the high priest went down into King David's tomb and extracted 3,000 talents of silver, paid the ransom, and then Antiochus left. But the second time David's tomb was disturbed, things didn't end so peacefully. Now
Herod the Great, who was king of Jerusalem in the time Jesus was born, decided to extract some of the gold out of King David's tomb. So he sent his own men down into the tomb to extract some of the wealth.
As Herod's men attempted to open the tomb, a blast of flame filled the chamber and drove them back. 2 of Herod's guards were killed, and the other soldiers were so frightened by the experience, they refused to re-enter the tomb, even under penalty of death.
This account, reported by Josephus, of Herod and his men going into David's tomb, had one unfortunate experience. Herod locked down the tomb, closed it down, and put a monument outside to ensure that no one would come this way again.
What happened to the treasure of David's lost tomb? Did future generations respect Herod's warning and stay clear of the king's final resting place? Or did the unstoppable force of the Roman Empire sweep it away long ago? Will the treasures of the Copper Scroll and David's tomb ever be found? Only time will tell. Meanwhile, archaeologists and treasure hunters alike will undoubtedly continue to search for these ancient riches. But perhaps at this point, it might be better for everyone if these lost Bible treasures remain lost.
Was there a golden box of incredible power that went before the Israelite army and destroyed their enemies?
There was never a biblical Ark of the Covenant. It's as fictional as the search for it in Indiana Jones in the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
There is ample archaeological and historical proof that the Ark of the Covenant exists exactly as described in the book of Exodus in the Bible.
If this remarkable artifact ever did exist, where is it now? Has it been found? And what could it mean for the world if it is found and ultimately opened? Is there something so incredible about this device that it is actually deadly to the touch?
There's absolutely no reason to imagine that the ark that was in the Temple of Solomon in Jerusalem in 586 BC, when that temple was destroyed, survives in any way, shape, or form.
The ark, or the chest that is described in the Bible, if it ever did exist, has long since been lost.
The Ark of the Covenant definitely existed, and it's very probable that it exists today.
Ever since Indiana Jones began his search for the fabled Ark of the Covenant, this long-lost and all but forgotten artifact of early biblical literature has taken on new life. A number of writers, adventurers, archaeologists, and theologians have, in recent years, claimed to have knowledge of the whereabouts of the Ark. Some are certain that it is housed in a small temple in Ethiopia. Others are convinced that it is still hidden away in a secret chamber beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Still others claim to have actually seen the Ark in a cavern. Each group cites specific proofs for their contention, and in the next hour we'll closely examine each of these proposals as well as a few others. But it's not just the argument about where it might be that gets our attention. It's the question of whether such a device ever existed at all, and if it did, does it still possess its incredible power? Of all the stories in the Bible, this account probably generates the greatest controversy. Was there, in fact, a beautifully crafted casket that was infused with the power of God? A power that could rout armies, even destroy city walls? Could a band of refugees wandering in the Sinai Desert have had the skill and technology to put such a marvelous piece of workmanship together? And if they did build it, is it reasonable to believe that the Israelite army always carried it before them into battle? At the core of these often heated discussions is an ancient wooden chest, covered inside and out with beaten gold and known literally throughout the world as the Ark of the Covenant. It is at least 3,500 years old and the story of what it is and how it came to be is found here in the book of Exodus. According to chapters 25 through 30, God gave Moses explicit instructions for the construction of the ark.
The Bible tells us that inside the Ark of the Covenant were the famous tablets of the law, produced by the hand of God on Mount Sinai for Moses. Those tablets of the law represent the covenant of God with Israel. They are incredibly important to Israel, and they are supposed to be in the Ark of the Covenant. Also, a bowl containing the manna that God used to miraculously supply the food for the Israelites in the wilderness experience. Also, the rod of Aaron. These objects, together with the Ark of the Covenant, have been missing now for thousands of years.
To the Israelites, undoubtedly the ark was their most sacred religious object, for it served as the footstool of the true God, and His divine presence was once visible there.
The Israelites believed that the Ark of the Covenant was responsible to allow them to walk across the Jordan River when it was miraculously dried up. The Ark of the Covenant was used when they surrounded the city of Jericho 7 times. The entire city fell into the ground, as archaeologists have verified. The Ark was used in battle after battle, and won victory after victory for the Israelites.
For 500 years, the ark was, for the Jews, the most precious and sacred object in the world.
The book of Revelation speaks of the ark being seen in heaven. And I think Christians are excited about the ark because of the fact that it was a gold box. But to get excited about the ark and forget what it contained is like a bride getting excited about the box that the wedding ring came in. The ark was the Ark of the Covenant. The covenant was the 10 Commandments that were in the ark. So the ark contained the 2 tablets of God's law. Those 10 Commandments were an expression of God's character and His nature.
According to 2 Chronicles, when Shishak, the king of Egypt, attacked Jerusalem, he carried off the treasures of the Lord and the treasures of the royal palace. He took everything. But if Shishak took the ark, which ark did he take? When David became the king of Israel, he brought the ark to his new capital with a great deal of fanfare. But apparently everyone had forgotten about the ark's great power and that it was forbidden for any but the Levites to touch it. Look out! That David had the true Ark of the Covenant was soon made clear. This was the ark King David would try to bring into a newly built temple, but it would be his son, Solomon, who would eventually make that dream a reality.
David was a warrior, and because of that, God prevented him from building the temple. But his son Solomon asked for wisdom, so he was allowed to construct the divine sanctuary, and built what is reputed to be the most beautiful and elaborate temple ever built. And in it, in the Holy of Holies, he enshrined the fabled seat of God's power on earth, the true Ark of the Covenant. But from that time, the Bible falls silent about the Ark. It is mentioned once more only, and that is in the book of Jeremiah, and with an air of finality. Jeremiah says, "The Ark of the Covenant of the Lord, it will never enter their minds or be remembered. It will not be missed, nor will another one be made."
If you love a mystery, well, this is where it starts. There is no mention again of the Ark in any active sense, but legends and stories there are more than enough. One of these is the 2-ark proposal. In the Ethiopian version, cited in the Encyclopedia Britannica, Solomon is supposed to have had a duplicate of the ark made, which he gave as a present to Menelik, his son by the Queen of Sheba. But the wily Menelik substituted the replica for the real ark, which he then carried to his capital in Ethiopia.
There is, in fact, an unbroken historical tradition in the royal chronicles of Ethiopia that they have the Ark of the Covenant.
There is a building, an underground temple in northern Ethiopia, in the city of Axum, underneath a church which is today called the Church of Zion. This building is claimed to contain the true Ark of the Covenant.
Regardless of what others say or believe, one thing is certain. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church worships a relic they believe to be the true Ark. It is protected by a guardian, a Coptic priest who never leaves the premises and never allows anyone to see it. At age 7, the new guardian is taken into the temple. He will be the only person to look behind the faded red drape of the Holy of Holies until the day he dies. Other Christian churches throughout Ethiopia also have replicas of the Ark tucked away in a room they also refer to as the Holy of Holies. Should something happen to this replica, the church is considered unconsecrated.
We know that in 1936, there was an attempt by Mussolini and his Italian troops that were invading Ethiopia to capture the Ark of the Covenant. This object, according to the B'nai B'rith Messenger magazine, in 1936 was moved to protect it from being captured by the Italian army. In 1965, as related to us on a program by Prince Mengesha Sevanun, the Governor General of Ethiopia, he, as a royal prince and as well as being royal Governor General, took Queen Elizabeth II of England in 1965 on a royal tour of Ethiopia, and he told us that he took her in to visit the Ark of the Covenant.
Actually, it's not necessary for us to believe that Menelik took the Ark of the Covenant during the reign of King Solomon. There's ample evidence that the Ark of the Covenant left Jerusalem some 300 years later.
The research eventually led to a particularly violent time in the history of Israel, as recorded in the Bible, the reign of the idolatrous King Manasseh, who, among other blasphemies, installed a pagan idol in the Holy of Holies in the temple.
King Manasseh practiced wizardry and sorcery. He even brought pagan idols into the temple. The loyal priests wouldn't have allowed this. They would have taken the Ark of the Covenant someplace.
That's certainly a reasonable assumption. But move the Ark where? And what evidence is there that something as sacred as the Ark of the Covenant was ever taken out of the temple by the priesthood?
A Jewish temple was built outside of Jerusalem during the First Temple period. Now, this is an extraordinarily important development. There would seem to be no justification for the construction of a temple anywhere outside of Jerusalem. If you look at the biblical text on this, you'll find that the reason for the building of the temple in the first place is stated very clearly.
I had it in my heart to build a house of rest for the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord.
Further investigation shows that the temple was built by the priests who fled from the wicked reign of Manasseh.
Dr. Adolf Hanna has personally been involved with the archaeology of Elephantine Island for over 20 years. According to Dr. Hanna, writing has been discovered that indicates the Ark of the Covenant was there and rested in this temple. This temple was built to the same dimensions as Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, but it was eventually destroyed. Why was it so completely destroyed? And by whom?
There was a conflict between the Jews and the Egyptians. It was standard practice for the Jews to sacrifice a ram every morning at sunrise. But this just happened to be the Egyptians' favorite god, Khnum. And they didn't appreciate their god being killed every morning. The Jewish community was simply no longer welcome on the island of Elephantine.
The Ark, if it was here, vanished once again along with the people. But Dr. Hanna, based on his own research, has developed an interesting theory of the Ark's history.
According to Dr. Hanna, the Jews at Elephantine wrote a letter to Jerusalem asking for help in rebuilding the temple. But when the Jews in Jerusalem found out there was another temple, they were furious, and they rebuffed the Jews at Elephantine for having ever built it in the first place. The Jews at Elephantine Island felt not welcome in Jerusalem. They were no longer welcome at Elephantine, so they took the Ark of the Covenant and followed the Nile River south into Ethiopia.
Could it be that we are finally on the trail of the true Ark of the Covenant? Is it possible that it wasn't Menelik, but a group of Jewish priests who brought the Ark to Ethiopia? Do these young Ethiopian Jews know where the Ark might be today? The mystery continues to unfold. If the Ark of the Covenant was removed from its place in the temple to protect it from the desecrations of King Manasseh and taken to Elephantine Island, that still leaves two unanswered questions. How did the Ark get from Egypt to Ethiopia, and how did it come into possession of the Christians?
The vast Nile River system leads ultimately to one of two sources. The first one, of course, is Uganda. The other source of the Nile, the Blue Nile, where most of the water comes from, is in Lake Tana in Ethiopia.
One of the most surprising discoveries of Hancock and Cornuke's research was a small island tucked away in this huge lake in Ethiopia. Here, they uncovered a surprising history.
It is very difficult to get to Tanakirkos Island. It takes about 3.5 hours by small boat to get there. Lake Tana is a very large lake. It's one of the largest in all Africa. And the Ethiopians consider Tanakirkos Island to be a very holy place.
This tiny island is one of Ethiopia's most protected holy sites. Barely a mile long and covered with lush vegetation, it is highly restricted. Few are allowed to visit, and only men are welcome.
When I arrived at Tanakirkos Island, it was the most mysterious place I've ever been to. It's literally like stepping back into time. They grow their own corn, they make their own clothes, they live in thatched huts, they live as they did thousands and thousands of years ago.
The tradition of the island is that the Ark of the Covenant was placed in a tent called a tabernacle here on this rocky ledge. Undisturbed by archaeologists or souvenir hunters, this small plateau does in fact show evidence of such a tent. Holes precisely 13 feet apart and placed in a north-south to east-west direction can still be seen. It is not surprising that these socket holes approximate the size of the tabernacle described in the Bible. But is there any other evidence to support this tradition?
The Ethiopians and the monks showed me many implements that they said were from Solomon's temple. They showed us meat forks, bowls, stands, silver trumpets. I said, why weren't these implements taken to Axum with the Ark of the Covenant? They said, when the country was converted to Christianity, they no longer needed these implements to be brought to Axum. So they were abandoned and left with the monks on the island.
According to the monks, this large brass dish, called a gomer, used in the blood sacrifice, this stand, and these large meat forks, also used in the blood sacrifice, are all artifacts that were left behind.
And if these objects are from Solomon's temple, they are the only ones in existence today.
Suddenly, all of the pieces of the puzzle start fitting together. We have evidence that the Ark of the Covenant left Jerusalem before the Babylonian invasion. Then we have a temple being built on the island of Elephantine, several hundred miles to the south. 200 years later, that temple is destroyed. And about the same time, we start hearing of the Ark of the Covenant in Ethiopia on the island of Kirkos. The monks there say the Ark was there for 800 years, until the Christian king came and took the Ark to Axum.
This is an intriguing account of where the Ark of the Covenant might be located. But before we accept it as gospel, perhaps we should examine the even more provocative Israelite account. This tradition begins in 586 BC when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar and his armies were about to deliver the final destructive blow to Jerusalem. According to Jewish historians, this was anticipated, and the temple priests took precautions to protect the Ark.
Your grace and forgiveness, holy ones. The walls are breached, and the Babylonians are pouring into the city. You must flee, now.
Quickly, brethren. We must do it quickly.
According to this tradition, the Ark was taken by the priest and secreted in a vault under the Temple of Solomon that could only be accessed through an underground tunnel. It was thought lost forever, until now. The most important evidence that the Bible is literally true could come from the rediscovery of the Ark of the Covenant. That's why so many have looked so hard for it. But is there any way to reconcile the two traditions? Could there be an ark both in Ethiopia and under the Temple Mount?
When the Queen of Sheba visited Solomon in Jerusalem, she had an affair with him, and the payment was the ark. She demanded the ark, and she took the ark back to Sheba, which is Ethiopia. Before that, it was called the Ark of the Lord. After that, it was simply called the Ark. And many people believe, and it could be, that a duplicate ark was made and put into the temple area, and the true ark was taken to Ethiopia.
Or could it be that all the searching is in vain? The book of Revelation states very plainly that John saw the ark in heaven.
Some confusion has been caused by the fact that Revelation chapter 19 refers to a prophetic vision in which the author describes seeing a vision of the ark in heaven. This is no contradiction to the fact of there being an earthly ark that is still in existence. The fact is that God tells us in the book of Exodus that Moses was commanded to make the earthly ark, as well as the tabernacle and all the objects, after the pattern of the original that was in heaven. So in other words, there has always been an Ark of the Covenant in heaven, as well as the earthly ark.
But does anyone really know? And if there are those who have reliable information, do they know which ark is the true ark? Is it possible that the Ethiopian ark and the ark said to be under the Temple Mount could be the same? Have the Jews finally reclaimed their most precious religious artifact, the true Ark of the Covenant? In 1981, an excavation took place on Temple Mount. 3 rabbis made a discovery that very nearly set off another holy war between the Muslims and Jews.
If we look at this sketch of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, we can see subterranean passageways. Superimposing upon this a model of the temple, the Jewish historical sources tell us that there was a chamber of wood, or a wood pen, underneath which was a secret chamber that King Josiah deposited the Ark of the Covenant in shortly before the destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. In 1981, 3 rabbis entered through Warren's Gate, one of the original entrances to the Temple Mount. They tunneled through and came to an area in which they claim they now have direct knowledge of the exact location of the Ark of the Covenant within this chamber.
Yet Huda Getz, chief rabbi of the Western Wall, was one of the tunnelers in 1981. Rabbi Getz states that he has found the Ark of the Covenant and its contents, including the original 10 Commandments, hidden for over 2,500 years in a secret vault beneath the temple. These incredible discoveries were also witnessed by Rabbi Shlomo Goren.
We were excavating under the Temple Mount in Jerusalem when we came to an underground room deep beneath and in direction of the Holy of the Holies. And it was the Ark of the Covenant that Moses placed in the 10 Commandments. When we came close to the Holy of the Holies, the Arab management of the Temple Mount, they decided to stop our diggings, and they erected a wall in order to stop us from getting to the Holy Ark.
As to the contention that the Ark under the Temple Mount is a replica, the same contention might as easily be made concerning the Ethiopian Ark. There is really no other basis to support the Ethiopian claim than the Ethiopian traditions. And in fact, there are a great many replicas of the Ark throughout the churches in Ethiopia that preserve this tradition. The evidence rather strongly supports the real Ark being under the Temple Mount.
So the evidence and the testimonies for the Ark being under the Temple Mount are also very compelling. Is it possible that 2 arks were made and both have been found?
The greatest Jewish rabbi in history, Moses Maimonides, in around 1200 AD, wrote a 14-volume series called the Mishnah Torah to codify Jewish law. In one of those 14 books, called the one that is dealing with the rebuilding of the temple, he tells us that there is a Jewish tradition handed down by the rabbis and the Talmud that Solomon was commanded to make a second ark, and that this second ark was sometimes used and taken out in battle. There is no additional evidence beyond this tradition, but there certainly is a written confirmation that there was a tradition of 2 arks.
Modern researchers are faced with the possibility that there have always been 2 arks, both sacred both constructed by God's command. Could this be true? The black Jews of Ethiopia were rescued from persecution and death by an heroic airlift of the Israeli military during the violent closing days of the Ethiopian Civil War. This is a well-attested fact. But could it be that there was another rescue that took place about the same time, a rescue that has largely been kept a secret?
There is compelling historical evidence from the Ethiopian records, the Kaber Nagas, the Royal Chronicles, that the Ark has been in Ethiopia for 3,000 years. However, I've had 3 independent sources, an Ethiopian Air Force general, an Israeli Air Force general, as well as a Canadian diplomat who was in Ethiopia at the time in 1991 when the Ethiopian Civil War ended, that this object was taken out of Ethiopia by the Israelis, who apparently flew into Ethiopia with a military plane, and these men, though they were elite military units, were composed of people from the tribe of Levi. According to the scriptures, only those from the tribe of Levi were allowed to touch the ark in the sense of carrying it by carrying the staves without touching the actual body of the ark. According to these rumors, the ark was taken secretly to Israel, where it remains waiting in secret until the time when the temple will be built and the ark will be placed once more in the Holy of Holies.
The key to our direct relationship with God is the Holy Temple. The main way that we are going about this is by actually producing, restoring, creating the vessels that can be used in the temple. Of the 93 basic categories of vessels that are described in the Holy Sources, we have so far created almost 60 vessels made of gold, copper, and silver, according to the original source material, and based on the complicated nuances and requirements of Jewish law. While our itinerary includes many of the vessels that are described in the Holy Sources to be used in the temple, the Ark is one item which is not on our itinerary for recreation because we are aware of the location of the original, which was hidden in the time of the first temple before the first destruction.
The evidence seems very strong that the Ark of the Covenant has indeed been found. But if it has, those who know of its precise location are still keeping it a secret. Is it possible that someday, soon, perhaps in our lifetime, the Ark of the Covenant with its precious artifacts will be brought out to a waiting world? What will it mean for all mankind if the actual covenant revealed to Moses is suddenly before our very eyes? Will it still have power to strengthen armies as it did the armies of the ancient Jewish nation? Or will it simply empower Judeo-Christian faith as it has done for the Ethiopian Christians and Jews for the past 3,000 years? What could this remarkable artifact bring into our lives? The answer to that question is definitely worth considering.